If you think how often we champion Mr Beast and his strategies and we use him as the godfather of YouTube, Casey Neistat had a different take. Mr Beastification.
It's what I hate about YouTube. The Mr Beastification of YouTube.
Watching trash, fast food content, as Casey refers to it, designed to grab your attention, but it isn't designed to provide any value. The person who suffers is the end user. I think that we're at the stage where that's table stakes.
Let's play some blackjack!
Hey guys.
What are we gonna do? We are so fucked.
If you do marketing that is indifferent or bland, you may as well not try.
Everybody is optimizing, hyper-optimizing down to the finest detail, which is essentially a race to the bottom.
This is the final episode of Memes and Machines in 2023. Can you believe it? And this is one not to be missed. We talked about Facebook's growth playbook, and we dived into some challenges that they had when they went international. What lessons can be learned from their experiences whenever you take your business or your brand into another territory? If you are a boring company, you don't have to be boring. That's the great thing about marketing. Indifference is where marketing dies, so don't be vanilla. We explore Guinness and we break down why they often do exceptional marketing, how they've earned the authority to put their product front and center of all their marketing efforts, and more recently, how they are being very creative in their approach to capture first-party and zero-party data. And we conclude with two things. We discuss the Mr Beastification of YouTube and why that could be a bad thing. And finally, we share both Catty and I's New Year resolutions as it relates to our professional endeavors, our marketing resolutions for 2024.
This is the best gift you'll receive this Christmas.
What a line. That's why they pay you the big bucks. You get paid the big bucks for those nice lines. Merry Christmas, Catman. Good to see you.
Merry Christmas. How have you been?
Good. We're on the countdown now. Final week. I actually think this will be our last episode of the year. So I'm very surprised that you are not dressed as Rudolph, or at the very least wearing a Christmas jumper.
Added some green, some reds. I'm seeing some Christmas colours in here. Don't know what I'm looking at over there though.
A snowman. I dressed
Fair
as
enough.
a snowman. Good man. Well, look, we're probably going to spend this episode reflecting on the year gone by. But before we do, I wanted to tell you about a story I found really interesting. So I was listening to a podcast from the former head of growth at Facebook, and he was describing his experiences in internationalizing Facebook. And for anyone that hasn't heard of this little company called Facebook, they probably have one of the most famous playbooks when you talk about growth and how do you scale, considering the rate at which they internationalize and not going from, like most of us would be happy from going from 0 to 10,000 or 0 to 1 million would be a major milestone. For Facebook, they exceeded or went over 1 billion in record time at a time when it truly was unprecedented. So I think you have to give the growth teams and the product teams and all those involved in the early days so much credit. One of the stories I found most fascinating was when the head of growth spoke about entering Japan. So by this point, they'd had loads of success entering every single territory, and this playbook that they rolled out worked from time and time again. And one of the cornerstone tactics that they used was the invite feature. So you would join Facebook, and I could then invite others and people within my network to do the same. And that was the network effect that drove the growth of the platform. What they found in Japan was fascinating. They dropped off a cliff. So they were signing people up through their playbook, and there just wasn't this network effect or this social graph that you would expect where people's friends were joining. And they did all this market research and couldn't get to the bottom of it. and they started to speak to people in the street. And what became very clear was the fact that in Japan, to invite someone to something new is actually seen as disrespectful or rude. It's kind of culturally insensitive to say, hey, I'm inviting you to this new thing. It's maybe seen as an overreach or something of that nature. So what they did is, to combat that, is they didn't change their playbook. They simply changed their language. And they changed the word, I'm now inviting you as a friend to come join the platform, to I now announce that I am on the platform, which was seen as more socially acceptable within Japan. And lo and behold, the playbook works, and millions and millions of users sign up during this kind of network effect. And I suppose what would be really good to start is get your take as a person into the markets in multiple territories, has supported many brands go from, say, European countries to enter the US. How much does cultural knowledge matter in marketing?
It's super important. It's funny because as social media has grown, it's made a lot of cultures kind of closer together. It's removed a lot of those differences in a lot of ways. And I think somebody who's moved from the UK market to the US market, one of the big things I realized is that actually a lot of the cultural differences that we used to think really separated the two nations, there's actually a lot less distance between them now. And we share a lot of the same popular culture figures. We share a lot of the same interests and basically the same platforms as well. But then it's the real kind of minute nuances and niche differences that do make a difference. And that's where that kind of expert knowledge and difference comes from. I think when you have completely different markets that are, a million miles away from us, that's when it gets really, really interesting. Similar story to yours, I remember reading about the way in which people use smartphones in different territories, particularly Asia, China, and I also think Africa as well. One thing people discovered was when they tried to launch smartphones there was that the way in which people literally interact with these phones is completely different. So we're used to this kind of app culture where we go on, we have an app store, we have all these different apps we download for each of our different services. You go to somewhere like China and they have one app, WeChat, they have a chat interface, and that's how they interact with their phone. And the real reason that they do that is because simply the way that technology grew in a very different timescale in that country. So we all grew up with desktops, so desktop computers. That's how we were introduced to kind of modern computing. That wasn't the case in somewhere like China. They didn't have a mass market desktop computer that children grew up using. What happened though was that mobile technology got really cheap really quickly. And so people had a mobile phone in their hands before they actually had, a personal computer. And so they saw that growth happen at just a different level, the way we did. And so everybody's introduction to smartphones was through a chat interface, and their introduction to computing was with a chat interface. They aren't familiar with using a mobile to browse the internet. And so like the thought of going on, the Safari app or whatever it was on the iPhone didn't make sense. So they had to actually redesign these experiences. They had to redesign the phone so that it was a chat interface. People were used to speaking to their phone, asking it to do things, all from one app. And that's just a long-winded way of saying that, you can have literally the history of the country, right, having a direct influence on the product you're trying to launch. And so it does require just like very deeply understanding, how people behave like that. And the way to do that is just to be there. I think that's, the people that discovered this, they had to get on the ground, they had to speak to people, they had to understand the geopolitical history of the country to really, appreciate what the consumer behaviors were.
Yeah, I think you touched on so many important aspects for all marketeers. You started by suggesting that culture, in many respects, because of the internet, certain barriers have been removed. Geography barriers, we're connected through our interests and what we love and our passions, and we're driven by a sense of community that is virtual in many respects. And despite that, though, we can be wildly different, right, in how we behave and interface in society. So culture to me is vast and varied. I think certain barriers have been taken down. But when you start speaking, it's one of the things I've struggled with a little bit when around the world we will often cite movements, say in China, particularly in social media, because they have such widespread, I'll give you one example, they have such widespread adoption of live, and social commerce is so, to your point, ingrained within their social media ecosystem, where it's very commonplace for individuals to sell and exchange goods and go live and have these shopping experiences. It's so normalized. And for the longest time in, say, the UK or across Europe, we've been talking about social shopping and live streaming and these things becoming increasingly important. And there's part of me always been skeptical for that understanding that, to your point, is there is a more systemic underlying variable that we don't have. There's so many layers to how we behave and what influences, etc. So yeah, it's really interesting. When you're marketing in new territories, what are kind of like your top tips? Are you, say, you can't, as a marketeer and you operate for a global brand, you can't know everything, right? And you may not have teams and boots on the ground. What steps would you take if you were to launch a campaign in a new country, just to make sure you're safeguarded?
Yeah, I mean, like you do have to consume some of the culture, I think, for sure. I think just understand, like, if you're launching something in the US and you've never been there before, like, start consuming, like the NBA, right? Like, what are the big, because the great thing about culture is that you get a lot of crossovers. Where you watch like the most popular sport, you'll probably get a taste for the celebrity culture or the fashion or music that's popular at the time. And I think looking for those kind of places where those Venn diagrams intersect and then consuming those, pieces of culture, I think is probably the best thing you can do. Because like you said, you're never going to be able to consume everything. But you do have to get really deep, and you have to listen to music you might not listen to. You have to like look for the online communities where people are talking about this stuff. I would say, like, the only way you really get a taste for the culture of the place is to be around people from that place, right? Like, the only time I feel like I really understood American culture was once I had a bunch of American friends, because that's how you learn things. It's how you discover. You're never going to find it through Twitter or just by like casually browsing. You need someone to bring it up in conversation, because then you get a real taste for what are actually people talking about. And so you have to create your own personal networks. It's difficult to do, and obviously if you're not from that place, it's a very different game altogether. But like I said, like, culture is now available to everyone. Like, there's no barriers anymore. There's no geographic barriers. You can find out who are the most popular creators, who are the most popular musicians in certain territories, and listen to them, consume them. I think podcasts as well. We have like thousands of millions of hours of content from these regions that we can now consume. And so it's it's about just embedding yourself in the culture.
Yeah, and I'd build on that and go, as a brand, if you're entering a new space, and when we talk about culture, we could talk about you are a brand and you want to now start connecting with gamers. So you would go to maybe Twitch.
Yeah.
It's important that you do it in the right way. And one tactic you can employ is not enter as a brand, but enter through the eyes of creators and partners and people. You can empower a creator at any part of the world, give them the sentiment of your campaign or your brand or your values and your products and services, and allow them to create. Let them show you the way. Let them lead the path, as opposed to the guesswork that would naturally go on.
Yeah.
And I'll go one step further. Actually, I've been thinking a lot about how do we use GPTs in our work. So for anyone that isn't familiar, OpenAI launched something called the GPT Store, and they made it easily accessible for anyone to launch a GPT. Think of this as a custom AI and a app store where you can, use and download these custom AIs. And For me, one of the most interesting user case, and we've been doing a lot of testing at Flight Story, we haven't quite cracked it yet, but I have this belief that in the next few years, we can take the guesswork out of marketing. For the longest time, we've been able to use data to take educated guesses around what audiences like and love, right? So we're able to not just use anecdotes and feelings, we can actually use data to substantiate and help guide our decisions. I think now what you were describing there, going, I know nothing about, I don't know, pick a South Korea, pick a region, South Korea, but I'm launching my product and service in South Korea. There is absolutely no reason that you couldn't create a custom GPT of your exact audience that is South Korean, age 25, has a passion for K-pop and something else, and you can create that archetype. And you can now test your advertising, your copy, your imagery on that GPT. You can get real-time feedback and say, how would you recommend that I change this to make it more relevant for you? And I'm not suggesting that today you're going to get to the right answers, but I think within the very near future, the rate of evolution and the sophistication of these AI models, I think it's very realistic that we can start to take the guesswork out of marketing and use these tools to augment and make us better marketeers. So I'm really, really fascinated with using technology, and we've said this before, but like language is no longer a barrier. Before you used to have to go to an individual. Well, you had to go to an individual and have them translate, and it was costly and time consuming. Now you can click a button. And you clicking a button, you could do that on Google Translate, 2 years ago, but it wasn't the same. Today, it's, uncanny in many respects. So, yeah, I think technology is going to play a big role in ensuring that marketeers show up in a, let's say, culturally relevant way in any country, in any part of the world.
Yeah, I think that's one piece, and I think the second piece is probably sometimes overlooked is just hire someone from that region. I think, I think about sometimes when we launched Social Chain in the US, I remember 6 months in going, we don't have any Americans. It was a bunch of us from the UK, because we knew each other, we knew we were good performers and we were going to deliver. But at one point, it's like, actually, we need some people from the US who actually know what it's like to live here and know what it's like to consume products here. And so, sounds obvious, but it's very easy, because your team are where you are, you trust your team, you want to have them take over the world. It's very easy to forget that you should actually really be hiring a majority, a team that's majority from the place that you're activating it.
Yeah, I recount a story, and I don't know if you were in the office at the time, but it's probably it just shows a clash of worlds and cultures. So I remember we had a summer internship, and I was walking around the office, and I went over to the fridge, and I saw all these cans of flavored water, and this flavored water happened to be called White Claw, but I'd never heard of White Claw. I'd never heard of a hard seltzer. It's not a category in the UK. It's not something we're familiar with, but if you're not familiar, it's kind of like vodka, and it's a flavored water, right? It's not something we typically have. But I remember just cracking one open at like 11 a.m., walking past all the interns and them sniggering, and I'm thinking, these are laughing at me, right? And then someone made a comment like, whoa, all's getting on it today. And I had absolutely no idea. Very inappropriate to walk through the office in the middle of the day, 11 a.m. with a alcoholic beverage. No wonder the interns were laughing. But yeah, that's just and I'm sure we can both count a million examples where we've royally just misjudged the situation.
Thank God the interns are from the US. That's what you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, I saw something this week actually, and I wanted to pick your brains on it. So, I'm gonna talk about a company that you've probably never heard of. They're a company called Blackstone, and Blackstone are a asset manager, meaning they make investments, right? So think of anyone in this sector or this industry. It's highly regulated. It's highly conservative. It's very serious. And I'm going to say it, incredibly boring. And I saw an ad hit my feed to celebrate their Christmas. And what it was basically all their leadership making fun of themselves, throwing a party in this really like cheesy to camera. I don't know what it was. I'm going to do a really bad job of describing what it was, but it wasn't very good. But it was very different to category norms. It's not the type of thing that you expect a serious, highly regulated business to do. And as a consequence, I looked at the feedback, I read the comments, and it was applauded. Bearing in mind this company, it reaches my feed at the other side of the world, an American business, reaches my feed, and I watch the ads, and I think it's absolutely trash. Not good, not, you can do humor and you can do it well. This wasn't done well. However, it performed incredibly well. And I'm sure now many people that hadn't heard of Blackstone may now have heard of them, right? So my question to you is, if you are a stale, pale, boring, conservative company, should you market yourself differently? And if you do you have a much greater chance of winning the attention wars?
Yeah, I think when you're a company like that, you almost have less to lose in that you don't really have a consumer-facing, public-facing brand that could be damaged if this went wrong. So your upside is kind of uncapped because you do something daft, you do something a bit stupid, and nobody sees it. Well, I mean, it's a waste of time, but at least nobody saw it. If you're a Coca-Cola and you do that, and you do something bad, like low quality, everyone's going to see it, and it's going to be a damage to your brand. So if you're an insurance company, if you're a used car dealership, if you're someone who is traditionally not as an exciting industry, or at the moment isn't the kind of industry that people are going to be talking about, then why not put something out there which has that kind of viral potential? I think they created this with the view, either nobody's going to see this or everybody's going to see it. And so, unless you feel like it's damaging to your brand or your reputation in any way, which there is also that to think about. If they're an asset management firm, are some of their customers going to be looking at this and going, what are you guys spending your time doing?
Joe.
Yeah, I need some returns on my investments. Here is a priority. If you don't think there's any risk there, then absolutely. I think we've seen it a few times where random mom and pop shop adverts have gone crazy viral, and I think it makes a lot of sense because it sticks out. Like you said, it's marketing that is in this kind of weird place between low production, but also like funny, viral potential as well.
Yeah, the thing is about this particular, I agree with you to a point. This particular ad was, it wasn't low production. It was probably pretty expensive, right? The production, it was just so badly done. And I tend to believe that in these conservative sectors where they believe they have to show up in a certain way because all their competitors show up in a certain way and they're in the business of being serious, we make these false assumptions that because we are in a serious business, serious people don't have fun. Serious people don't have a sense of humor. Serious people don't have feelings. And I think it's the same falsehoods that have circulated B2B marketing. It's nice to see in the world today, a lot of people that operate B2B businesses are realizing that you just have to be great at marketing. There is no such thing as advertising to another business per se. You've always got a person at the end of that buying cycle. And I tend to believe in a world increasingly geared by algorithms. If you do marketing that is indifferent or bland, you may as well not try. Like for me, indifference is where marketing dies. And I'll often cite, I remember when, this is going back some time, but Weatherspoons came out and it was a huge controversy because they had basically decided to come off social media. This is the first major brand to say, we are no longer doing social media. And everyone was like, how? Why? This is like the biggest thing ever. It's your biggest opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And then I looked at the data and I remember agreeing with them. If you think of like the average customer in a Wetherspoons, I looked at their social media and they were just doing it so badly. It was just like random location in random part of the world, random part of Britain, doing it badly. You are better off not doing it at all. You can put that energy, that resource, and that time into creating a slightly better customer experience, or I don't know, updating your menus, or whatever it is you do at Wetherspoons. But I tend to believe for the longest time, particularly in the world today, if you're going to market your company, you may as well do it properly. And properly to me is connecting with people in the ways that they want to be connected. They want to be entertained. They want to learn something. They want value. They want to feel something. And if you don't deliver on any of those promises and you do the same vanilla nonsense that most people do in, let's say, conservative or boring environments, I think it's just a waste of time and you're better off not doing it.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the Wetherspoons example is interesting. I wonder if they've kept to that or not. But it's also knowing the kind of product you are, right? Where they have distribution in a very different way, right? They have, hundreds, thousands of physical locations across the country.
Location. Yeah,
exactly. So they don't need a digital forum to reach people. I think they probably would do a great job. I think about TikTok as a channel for them, right? Where they probably missed the boat a little bit there. They have such huge cultural cachet, Wetherspoons. They have so much user-generated content being created about it. They could harness that in an incredibly powerful way. But they probably look at their data and go, do we need to? No, but in terms of future-proofing your business, it seems short-sighted not to be investing heavily on, how do you double down on your brand for a younger consumer who may not have that, existing perception of Wetherspoons?
Yeah, 100%. There's so many in-jokes. There's so many things that they could own. But the point I make is not that they shouldn't be on social media, but in the context of doing it badly, they probably shouldn't, right? To your, there's many other areas that they can do. And I see this time and time again. It's the same challenge you have where a lot of companies think they have to be on every channel and they just do everything mediocre. And actually, you're much better. I was doing my own personal content calendar that my assistant Sarah schedules for me, and I write out some notes, and she'll make a first draft, and then I kind of tweak it. And I'm a bit of a control freak. I would love to get to the point where I could absolve myself of writing copy, but I enjoy the process.
Yeah.
On the topic of pints, let's stay on piss. I saw a really interesting or clever piece of content marketing, and it was basically from Guinness. Guinness have created it, and the video was a snow boot leaving kind of these Guinness glasses in the snow, right? And you had to sign up to a website in order for your chance to register to get a pair of these Guinness UGG type boots. And it was quite cute because it's a simple idea. I've seen many of these of late. I think it was Asda that had put a parking space for Santa and the reindeers on top of one of their location roofs. And these are kind of these novel ideas that will typically always work from a content marketing because they're smart and clever, they're easily shareable, etc. What was interesting about the Guinness example, though, was it is symbolic of companies getting increasingly more creative in their data capture efforts. So, we are about to hit a moment where privacy and we will have a cookieless future. So more and more companies are trying to get first-party and zero-party data. And they're having to get more creative in order to get that information. So firstly, what do you think of using kind of creative tactics as a entry point for things like data capture? And did you see the Guinness example?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think the interesting part with start with I guess the boring part, the data side, is that the real opportunity, right, is to start building an audience that you really own, like building an email list, for example, that you can reach directly. I think the challenge there is always like, why would I sign up to a Guinness email list? Like, what are they going to send me every single week that I'm going to then click through to? So I think this is a great answer to that, where you might get that short-term hit, you might get a short-term spike of a bunch of people signing up, but I'd be curious to understand how they're going to retain those users, how they're going to get people to click through to offers and deals in the future. But I think it's absolutely genius. And what I love about Guinness is they really so much of their marketing can boil down to basically one thread of creativity, which is how do we make our iconic pint glass, which is the jet black pint with a white head on top, how do we make that show up in the real world in as many different ways as possible? And so you see all the time, every single year there's 5 or 6 Guinness ads people share where it's like the rugby tee, for the Rugby World Cup, it's like the rugby tee that's set up to look like the top of a white Guinness pint. There's a bunch of others that I can't remember off the top of my head, and this is the latest one, like snow in the floor, which is now made to look like a Guinness pint. And no matter how many times people see it, they love it. They love seeing how has somebody made a Guinness pint show up in the real world. And I guess the lesson there is just double down whenever you have something that works. Like, reuse the same idea in a million different ways and apply it to different cultural contexts. And then with something like this, it's very clear that this is not a product that they are actually going to release. There's probably be about 2 or 3 of the pairs made. And this to me speaks to the same kind of, theory we've had in the past, where it's like, it's not about the product, or it's not about the physical thing you create. It's about the views and impressions it's going to get on social media. They know it's going to travel really far. People are going to share it. They can't actually sell these things because they're not going to spend the money to produce them, but we'll have 5 pairs in the back room that people can sign up to win. And like you said, it's a really smart piece of data capture. So yeah, I think they're just like, in terms of brand awareness, they're probably one of the best brands to do it. But it comes from having a very unique product as well that is instantly recognizable.
Yeah, they've reached a status that very few companies ever do in many respects. You're talking a 100+ year heritage brand, but the fact that they use their physical markers and their identity in everything they do is kind of like marketing utopia in many respects. Because how many people would love the opportunity to put like their redeeming like service or product characteristics in everything they did at marketing? It's everything that we tell marketers not to do. You can't put a product picture front and center of every single thing you do. And they just went, you know what? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
But it reminded me of, I saw a great ad from, it really reminds me and gives me a deep appreciation for amazing product design, because I saw, I think it was a Heinz ketchup bottle, and that's a very distinctive shape. And they put that next to something else, and like, there was literally no logo on there, but the bottle, and they put it next to a series of other tomato ketchups, and they were like, and it's like, yeah, because it's iconic, right? They didn't need great engineering, a great bottle, great design. It was iconic. It stood the test of time, and it becomes part of that like brand identity. And it's one of their distinctive markers that sets them apart. Just on the second point you mentioned there around, is this like beyond just being a clever way to capture data? There was part of me goes, they'd probably just been more effective at data capture if they just went 50% off your next pint. Like that. Yeah. That's probably like if they want mass appeal. But then when I go, okay, well, if we're going into a world now where they need to know more about their customers, you've got to think of a business like Guinness. A lot of their data sits with their merchants and their distributors and their partners and their retailers and the pubs and all the places where, you can get a pint of Guinness. So they don't actually control or know a lot about their customers per se. I'm sure they do, and I'm being a little facetious when I say, but compared to say maybe like an online, fashion house that knows everything about their customers. So in that type of world where they maybe have less first-party data, what they will be pursuing is trying to categorize people based on their interests. So maybe in this endeavor, and I may be giving them too much credit, but it's plausible that they're trying to understand which of their drinkers are into fashion and like bucket those to affinities to start to create profiles to now, segment that audience in their marketing efforts. You could say the same with like Guinness fans that like rugby or Guinness fans that like any given sport. There is part of me goes, I hope there's an incredibly smart marketeer that's doing some work, or it was just like cool random idea in their agencies. Agencies like random idea toolkit, and they just kicked it across. I don't know. And maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but yeah, I'd like to think maybe both could be true.
Yeah, it makes sense. And Guinness is a great case study. I think it's like, I would love to understand, it's a brand which was, traditionally old man in Ireland drinks Guinness. And now it's, young, cool people in East London drink Guinness. And I would love to understand how that shift happened, whether it is a marketing effort or is it just a great product that people pick up on. And it has, for right now, from where I sit, it's like a very cool, youthful drink. And it never used to be. And so I don't know how much that is marketing, how much of that is
Can I tell you?
Yeah.
I'll give you my take on that. I think Ireland's done one of the best branding jobs ever as like a nation. If you go to America, every American you speak to that has any long distance association with Ireland will tell you they're Irish. They've like done this really good job of owning these, out there drinking, witty, charming. They've picked all these like characteristics and done a phenomenal job of branding the country.
Very true. I don't know how much that is marketing and just they're good people, and maybe there's a reason that the English don't have as good a reputation anywhere else.
Wow. Yeah, that is true. We don't have a great... It's probably... I imagine, though, no, I agree with that, but I've got to assume, like, Brits abroad, that bad reputation that you're maybe referencing, I imagine Irish abroad are probably just as rowdy, but somehow
maybe
get away with it.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Dude, before we jumped on live, you were mentioning Casey Neistat to me. You watched... a really interesting video, and I thought his statement was fascinating that you were describing, where if you think how often we champion Mr Beast and his strategies and we use him as like the godfather of YouTube and content marketing, but Casey Neistat had a different take, and it wasn't a knock on Mr Beast, but he framed the Mr Beastification of the platform as being a bad thing. Explain why was that?
Yeah. And it's important to note that he very clearly states that he is a huge fan of Mr. Beast, thinks he's a genius, and this is no way a negative opinion on what Mr. Beast has done. But what one of the effects of Mr. Beast, and it's not just him. What it also is the fact that YouTube is a monetization platform, and more views equals more money, right? So this has become now a way of life. It's become it didn't used to be, right, but it's now become a job for many people, and the KPI that they're measured at, the thing they get paid to do, is to increase views. And Mr. Beast has spoken in length about all his videos, everything he does is incredibly analytical. It's all driven by data. He obsesses over how do I get these tiny incremental growth metrics when it comes to getting more people to see my content. And that means the thumbnail is completely optimized. It means the retention of the video is completely optimized. He isn't really thinking about the artistry of the video. He's thinking about how do I get more people to see this. And if you ever watch a Mr. Beast video, it's kind of an attack on the senses. Formula. You feel your brain being manipulated in a way to keep watching, and you kind of sit there for 6 minutes. It's similar to the effects when I used to scroll TikTok And 6 minutes in, I go, why am I watching this? Like, kind of like snap out of it, but I was hooked. And Mr. Beast is obviously the greatest at doing this, but he now has 1 million people copying him. And so, Casey refers to this as the Mr. Beastification of YouTube, where the whole channel is now converging into the same kind of content across different verticals. But it's content that feels very similar. It's all about the same ideas, and everybody is optimizing, hyper-optimizing down to the finest detail, which is essentially a race to the bottom, because we're all just going to be, fighting over these kind of viewership numbers without anybody actually creating something which might stand the test of time. And this is no disrespect to Mr. Beast, but in 100 years, I don't think we'll be looking at these videos in the same way we look at, a great movie, which has won an Oscar and has genuinely moved people. And so I think it's just this kind of philosophical dilemma that these platforms find themselves in, where they used to be a place for artists and creatives to express themselves. And the minute you introduce monetization, I think they kind of move away from that, and they become these attention portals where all it is how do I get more people to view my thing. And I think we're seeing it on Twitter, where since they have introduced revenue sharing, I'm noticing an increase in accounts which used to in the past be people sharing ideas, sharing thoughts, sharing some depth, and now they just post 30-second fight videos because they know it's going to get them 1 million impressions on that tweet. And you can see they have like content farms. They have people working for them to just spew out this content. They probably have some formula where they'll find a video on YouTube that's performing, or a video on Reddit that's performing, and they'll redistribute it to Twitter. You can see the maths and the science that's going in behind it. And in general, what's the person who suffers is the end user. The end user is, watching trash, fast food content, as Casey refers to it, where it's designed to grab your attention, but it isn't designed to provide any value. The problem is, as a consumer, it's now on us to sift through this. It's now on us to be better at consuming, because you can't just passively consume content anymore. If you passively scroll, you're just going to get shit, and you're going to get bad, low-quality content, which is designed to retain attention. You actually now have to proactively seek out people that you are going to teach you stuff and you're going to respond to. And so I think it's just an interesting way in which the platforms are changing, and the responsibility of curation is now coming way more to the user than it is to the platform.
Yeah, everything you're describing is ladders to a broader point where we are all algorithmic pleasing as opposed to creating. When we talk about strategies for platform, and have done for, let's say, the last decade, if you were a social media marketeer, you're playing algorithm games and you're always trying to gain an edge. This is now just spilled out at scale because there are more content creators. You've got creators competing with other creators and copying the person in the lead. You have brands doing the same. The question I have for you in this proverbial race to the bottom, let's say, as a brand, are you doing anything differently? There is a reason people play algorithm games, is because it's highly effective. And often the first job of a marketeer is to understand audiences. And the second job as a marketeer is to then serve those audiences something in the most cost-efficient way, right? And the most cost-efficient way, sadly, is usually playing the algorithm game. So if you're a brand, are you doing anything differently? And do you envisage that may change in, say, the next couple of years?
Honestly, a lot of it is just be less attached to the data. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but I think people obsess over, what are our Twitter impressions every month? What trend line is that going in? Actually, the thing you need to do is slow down and think about, what are the stories we're telling, and how do we do it in a way that's very compelling? Because then you'll create something which is seen by tens of millions of people. I'm a huge fan of Coinbase's marketing. I think they're the best marketing in any kind of crypto organization, and they do an incredible job of really mature marketing for what is an industry which is obviously very new. And they recently did a campaign which was around just a beautiful piece of video content which was around how the system is broken for many young people, how it's very difficult to, afford a down payment for a house, how they feel like they get huge loan, that people incur huge loans for their college degrees, and that the system kind of feels stacked against you as a young person. And what I love about that, they just told a brilliant story with a brilliant video, and they tweeted it. There wasn't this like obsession with optimizing it for socials or making sure it was cut up, and there wasn't like meme bars to make me stop scrolling. It was, let's just create a beautiful piece of content that really resonates and hits with people. And I saw that and I just thought, of all the crypto companies, obviously I consume a lot of crypto marketing. A lot of it is very like fast paced and designed to capture attention, and wow, prices are going up and like flash in your face like you're in a casino. Sometimes the best thing to do is just like spend 2 months on a great piece of content and post it. And then if it resonates with people, they will share it naturally. The algorithms will recognize that people are watching it and they will serve it to people. So there isn't this like obsession with the optimization. Obviously, there are things that you have to do from a social standpoint. Like there are fundamentals now, but I think that we're at the stage where that's table stakes. Like everybody knows now, how to cut up a video, what size it needs to be. There are small incremental updates you can make. But actually, the best thing you can do is creative. Just spending more time on the creative, thinking, more deeply about the ideas you want to share. And then obviously execution is important. But yeah, that's high level, like what I came away with when I thought about all of this.
Yeah, Coinbase are a phenomenal example. And that particular campaign was beautiful in the sense that they took the story that was bigger than them. What is the entire crypto movement built on?
Yep.
It's built on flipping the system on its head. So they took the sentiment of the entire movement and they just delivered it without a single mention of a complex term, an acronym, and just humanized it. And it was beautifully done. And you're right, there's like, we're talking about it. Great marketing sort of not just transcends the copy. It's just, that's what creative does to us. It makes us feel something, we can appreciate it. And us probably sharing this to whoever listens to this, right?
Exactly.
Is again just reaffirming. And they'll never have the data to back this conversation up. They're never going to have the data to see how that impacted me and you, in any sense of the word. But great creative will always do that. It reminded me a little bit of Flight Stories marketing. We had quite a disconnect between, let's say, our attribution model and the content marketing we're doing. And it's not always very clear. If you think of in a typical agency client buying cycle, someone can be aware of you and there isn't an opportunity to work with you for 2 years, right? So you never know when that thing introduces you to that potential buyer. So, we just focus on, we take that ethos of how do we take our core essence and what we stand for and our values, and how do we consistently show up in the most creative way with our budget as well. We have budget constraints. We're a small business in the context of business, right? One thing I will say, where I'm going to give a slight build, I'm not going to say I disagree with you because I agree with you in essence. I actually think you should play algorithm games if you are a SME, if you're a small business. If you're not as well resourced, you're probably not going to have the good fortune to tell amazing stories in time and time again. You maybe don't have 6 weeks, 8 weeks to wait until you can put your ideas and messaging. And I also think if you're at the early stage of your company, Coinbase is over 10 years old or somewhere in that region, roughly about 10 years old. They've had time to figure out their voice and who they are in the world. I don't think new businesses have. I think new businesses have to create a lot in order to get the feedback to find out who they are, what works, etc. So that would be my only add. I think in principle I agree with you. Unless you are a newer company or a startup, I do believe that you should probably play algorithm games and try and maximize every dollar and learn as much as you can in the infancy of your company.
Agreed.
Dude, this is the last episode of 2023. Dare I say it? We made it to episode, I think this is like 18, 17, some number. I think this is number 18. What's really interesting, I will give you a data point that you may love. If we make it to episode 23, that puts us in the top 1% of all podcasts ever created in terms of numbers of episodes. So we are in the 1% club in probably by the end of January. But let's conclude today. And I would like to ask you what your marketing New Year's resolution would be. If you're to say, in 2024, what are some things that I'm going to do as a marketeer? What are some things I'm going to learn? How am I going to maybe behave differently? What am I going to focus on? Catman, drop some knowledge.
It's a good question. I kind of had an epiphany recently, where I realized that our team, we spend a lot of time, like creating a great video or creating a great piece of content, and often we'll post it once or twice across all of our platforms, and then that's it. We'll move on to the next thing. Then we'll move on to the next thing. Big thing for me next year is be shameless in posting the same stuff over and over and over again. It's like, imagine you shot a TV commercial and post it once, right? Like with social media, I think we sometimes forget that it's okay and we're allowed and no one's going to penalize us for posting the same content twice. And, playing with the copy, redistributing it slightly. I kind of had this realization where if I do that, I'm probably going to get over the year 200 or 300 extra pieces of content out of it, right? And so that's one thing that I'm going to really double down on is redistributing better. Like, how do I get much better at cashing in on the work that my team does by making sure that the assets they produce show up in as many places as possible?
Cashman. Forget Catman. Cash it in, man.
Cash it in. Cash in the work.
Shameless redistribution. That's a good one, actually. And you're right. As you were saying that, I was thinking about when I first started doing talking head conversations with our marketing team, and we would go on random rants about technology, business, hire it, you name it. I imagine there's some stuff in there from maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that would hit hard today.
Exactly.
If I just re-dropped out instead of just creating 10 new videos a week or whatever.
Exactly. And I think it's because it's not a TV commercial that we spent, if you shoot a TV commercial, you'll have a media plan that goes into halfway through next year. But because it's not that, we kind of think, we'll move on to the next thing. But yeah, something I say to my team a lot is the biggest thing we can do is cash in on the work we've already done. If there's any work that we've done that needs 10% to complete, we have case studies that we've written that we have 90% done. And then we start working on other case studies. I'm we need to cash in on the work we've already done first. Let's do the extra 10% in as many places as we can, and then worry about the next thing after.
Love that.
What about yours?
You always have this really beautiful way of branding your behaviors and cashing on work. Mine isn't going to be as branded as yours, but I have kind of 3 goals. One, I am going to create more. That's without a doubt number 1. You will see my face more on my own channels. I am going to create more. And I'm very disciplined with anything I introduce in my life. So I said this to you about, if we're going to do this podcast, we're going to show up every week. If I do something, I typically can turn an idea into a habit pretty quickly in my own life. But I'm going to create more, number 1. I intend to write a lot more. I typically have always avoided writing, because I used to underappreciate the skill of writing. I've over-relied on my ability to orate and communicate verbally. So I would, instead of writing long articulate messages, I would send someone a voice note, or, instead of spending a lot of time writing notes and preparing for a meeting, I'd rely on my ability to I'm a pretty good active listener. and I don't have problems communicating off the cuff. So I've realized that because I have a strength in my oral communication, I lean too much into that and I've neglected my writing. And this year I made a habit to write more. And I think it's definitely helped me in every aspect of my work a lot. So I want to write more. I feel like I'm getting better as well. And the friction and the discomfort you face when, writing, particularly when you're not comfortable doing it, I feel a lot less discomfort at the back end of the year than I did when I first started, maybe at the start of the year. So definitely going to write more. And then the final thing I want to do is I want to do more spontaneous content. So I've been very big throughout the last 2 years of Flight Story in creating systems, meaning how do I get the most content with the least amount of effort, maximum efficiency. So I would do podcasts and I'd say yes to a lot of podcasts. So I get lots of clips and I do conversations like this. And I do like a once a month filming with our marketing team. And I was always about building efficient systems for me to get high volumes. I'm really keen this year of being more reactive and spontaneous. So what I need to do to enable me to be more spontaneous and give hot takes and give more reactive commentary on things that happen in our world is I need more setup. So I think going into the start of next year, I'm going to invest in my apartment in London and then my place in Sheffield, a few places. I'm going to invest in better equipment, but then we'll have a better setup in the office as well, meaning that wherever I am, where I spend most of my time, I'm going to have a better setup to create. So yeah, they're my three. Create more, be more spontaneous with how I create. So I need a better system to enable me to do that. And writing, I'm going to try and focus on doing more written work.
Love it. Yeah, likewise. I think some equipment is definitely needed for next year for us both.
Bro, we need to get this merch line dropped. We need to get you some lighting and a Christmas jumper. They're high up on the list. But brother, I just want to say a massive thank you. I honestly thoroughly enjoy these conversations we have every week. I want to say a massive thank you to Sarah, who helps keep my life from not being chaotic, and Jay, our behind-the-scenes ninja, who spends all week editing this at light speed and then producing us our clips. And I've really enjoyed this process, and I have more motivation next year to figure out how do we level this up? How do we start to maybe bring in guests? How do we just do more and raise the stakes,
Yeah, and I think the final shout is to our listeners. Obviously, it's you're here at the start. It's been an incredible first 21 episodes, you say, or 20,
such a
18,
political answer.
19, how many were on?
Slides.
So yeah, let's look forward to the next.
That was like you
20.
were picking up your Grammy awards. I agree. Anyone who does listen, it's truly humbling. It's really interesting. I get feedback, and I'm sure you get the same, of people messaging saying, "Hey, I like this," or "I listened to that podcast," or "I was cycling the other day and listened," or that particular thing. And I think when we're speaking into a laptop and doing that, you sometimes forget that people are getting value out of this thing. And it's incredibly rewarding when you hear that feedback. So subscribe, keep throwing the feedback, and we will see you in 2024.